Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you're doing really well. I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much. I hope you're keeping lovely and cosy and warm as the weather gets a lot colder. And if you're living in a hot climate, I hope it gets lovely and cool for you. Don't forget to go and get that lovely drink, whatever it is, something warm and comforting or something uplifting and refreshing. But whatever it is, let me know about it, because I do love hearing from you. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I sat there staring vacantly at my computer, whirling myself around on the leather swivel chair awkwardly, at the chestnut desk in my bedroom, my mind heavily weighted down with the gloomy, despondent, tormenting feelings that had been bothering me for a considerably long period of time, like the remnants of a very bad flu that you haven't quite shaken off yet. These hammering, unrelenting thoughts had been like sharp knives stabbing me in the guts, an unceasing, frenzied attack, almost as if I was being stung over and over again by a buzzing hive of angry, belligerent bees, mad at me for disturbing their nest. The numbing stings from each attack made the feelings I was experiencing even more intense and defined. I stared at the blank white screen, as instinctively I tapped the indelible words written in the secret depths of my heart in seemingly invisible ink, transferring them directly with my quick tapping fingers to the keyboard, until the cryptic words flashed provocatively on the overbright screen. Words that were almost dirty, shameful, hidden, concealed words that should not be brushed, should be brushed under the carpet, sheltered from prying eyes. But now they were plain to see, clear as day, my feelings exposed on a computer keyboard, no longer buried in the dark recesses of my mind, but downloaded onto a word processor. The words, "A wolf knows when it's being raised by bears," stared back at me. I had written exactly what I was feeling, as somewhere in the foggy mist of my intuition, a hazy veil had shrouded the shameful bitter truth that had concealed this underlying intrinsic knowledge that I had evaded for so long, that had been downloaded into the very fabric of my DNA. I didn't want to see what my inner eye had discerned a very long time ago, when I was a mere 7-year-old boy. Now I was 13. It was like everything in the natural world, the trees, the fluffy white clouds, the verdant green turf, knew it all. A mulberry tree knows if the leaves it's carrying on its boughs are not its own. A daffodil knows it has a yellow head of petals. A blue martin knows the colour of its own feathers. I knew that I was not the offspring of my parents. I knew it, and where this arresting, unsought-for knowledge had come from, charging so audaciously into my understanding, with the impertinence of a male peacock strutting its stuff, I honestly do not know. But it was there, as bright as day, staring me blindly in the face. There was nothing about my parents that would make you perceive that I was not theirs. If I had been born with oriental looks, the distinguishing differences would have been so profound, the evidence remarkably clear to see, unable to be hidden or covered up, as everyone would know without question that that kid was certainly adopted. It would be a given. In my case, the evidence was clearly concealed, so subtly that it was inconspicuous. My mother's face wore an expression of huge relief, her tense, frightened brown eyes visibly relaxed. She even managed a half-hearted smile, but I could see through the bravado, as her smile did not reach her eyes. There was a troubled, concerned expression that hovered over her face like a seagull over a sandy beach. It was very clear to see. "What's wrong with a child being adopted?" my father had said. "I mean, if two loving parents want to look after a child that is not their own, well, I think it's a very agreeable thing to do, don't you?" "Do you think that the parents, knowing the child isn't their own biologically, that they might actually love it less?" "Of course not," said my mother, leaping into the conversation with a defensive defiance. "Of course not. Why should the parents love the child any less if it's adopted? That idea is nonsensical. Of course the parents would love the child as their very own. Why would it be any different?" "Do you think the parents are duty-bound to tell their child that it's not their own, should that be the case?" I'd hinted. Honestly, Leith, said my mother, leaping up from the table very quickly, grabbing my not-yet-finished dinner in her jittering arms that were shaking nervously, as once again my parents exchanged those surreptitious glances. Leith, she continued, you do ask some outrageous questions. I mean, what would we know about adoption? Precisely, said my father, interjecting. What would we know about the subject? Anyone for ice cream? My mother asked, which was a clear diversion to change the subject. I had nodded eagerly, because who doesn't like ice cream? But soon afterwards I found my pudding plate bursting with a generous, oversized portion of ice cream, designed to keep my mouth terribly busy eating, rather than talking. But I'd seen enough. I knew I was on to something. I could smell it. My mother was like the most hopeless shoplifter, stealing a red sweater from the store, wearing it directly over her head with the shop labels dangling off the garment, but brazenly telling the security guard that she hadn't stolen a bloody thing, when it was as clear as day to see. But, ma'am, the security guard would be likely to say, you're wearing the stolen jumper on your head. Everybody can see it. My mother's suspicious, guilty behaviour was screaming the words, you're adopted, son. Get over it. Big deal. I expressed my misgivings to my best friend Oscar when we were riding down the hiking trail in the woods, passing a couple of dog walkers who waved at us as we made our merry way. Me and Oscar parked our bikes against a couple of ponderosa pine trees as we left the sprawling woodgrove to walk through the luxuriant long grass of the flowering meadow, where the heads of pretty pink and blue flowers bobbed between the grassy blades, while over and above this verdant oasis spring butterflies danced from one flower to another like lacy pieces of confetti floating in the breeze. It was a perfect day. The blissful beams of spring sunshine showered our bodies in a radiant, pleasurable warmth that was not too hot but pleasant. I loved the weather like this. Absolutely perfect. We ambled towards the meandering silvery stream, where a few willow trees dangled over the water, their long, sweeping, graceful arched boughs with a plethora of lance-shaped leaves caressing the water's surface like hundreds of viridescent green feather boas. Water jutted over the rocks with a feisty discharge, creating a myriad of foaming white bubbles, while the crashing, thunderous sounds were so soothing to the ears, as all over the valley the cheerful chirruping calls of the songbirds could be heard. This was the quintessential favourite spot for me and my best friend Oscar. We loved it here. We would frequent it regularly. It was close to our homes in a leafy green Washington neighbourhood, where the countryside opened out into our back door, a mere bicycle journey from both of our houses, as we both only lived a few houses apart. So coming here you felt as if you were alone in an idyllic wilderness that was a rich, sumptuous haven for a teeming abundance of indigenous wildlife, from deers, raccoons, squirrels, foxes, wolves, coyotes, mountain lions, and the list goes on and on. Let's sit over here, I said, pointing to the slightly wet outcrop of rocks overlapping the water's edge. It doesn't matter if we get a wee bit of spray on us. Besides, we can throw pebbles directly into the water. And that is exactly what we did. I think I'm adopted, Oscar, I announced. For a moment you could have heard a pin drop. And then, as if on cue, my friend spluttered, What? You heard? I think I'm adopted. Oscar crinkled his forehead in a long line of furrows and picked up a rock to hurl in the water. We watched as the rock lunged in the air and then went splashing into the depths of the water. It sunk, gone from our sight. Oh, how I wished this adoption thing hanging over me could disappear like that. But it was eating me up on the inside like an insatiable worm that can't be satisfied. What the heck makes you think that? I repeated my cryptic words. A wolf knows when it's being raised by bears. My friend raised a quizzical brow. Wow, bro, that's big. That's deep. How can you possibly come to such a bizarre conclusion? Well, how do you know you're not adopted? I interjected. 'Cause I just know it. My point exactly. You know you're not adopted. I know I am. I just know. But that's not good enough, bro. You can't assume something. Have you even asked your parents? Well, let's just say we skirted over the subject of adoption. My mother looks as guilty as the dog that tore up the foam mattress while you were out. Is feigning innocent, acting as if the foam isn't even there, never existed, if you know what I mean. You know that I did it look, but I'm pretending I didn't. Boy, that is heavy. What are you going to do? Find out, I said. But how? Well, I'm going to look for the paperwork, aren't I? There has got to be some adoption papers lying around somewhere. But, protested my friend, you do look rather like your mother. I mean, you've got her dark brown hair and brown eyes, haven't you? Even your facial features aren't dissimilar. So what if we have physical features in common? That doesn't mean anything. So does a Douglas and Fraser fir. They look incredibly similar. You could be forgiven for believing they're exactly the same tree, but they are remarkably different in every way. Woo! You're sure about this, said Oscar, cocking his head awkwardly. If you do find out you're adopted, how will it make you feel? Angry, I said. Very angry. How would you feel if you knew you'd been lied to all your life? Well, we're only 13, Oscar reminded me. Maybe they don't want to tell you yet. I'm old enough to know the truth, I protested indignantly. I have the right to know who my real family is. All right, bro, keep your hair on. There's no need to get flustered. You're like a dog with a bone over this. Well, I need to know the truth. What's wrong with that? Over the next couple of days, I tried to search surreptitiously through some paperwork in my dad's office when he wasn't looking, but all I encountered was bills and bank statements. You know, the usual boring stuff. Nothing of intrinsic value or worth. But I did happen to go through my mother's bedstand drawers, and I stumbled across a little diary. I know I shouldn't look, but I quickly flicked through the pages. A couple of entries got my attention. It's difficult living with the guilt. I do want to tell him, but I can't. Another entry read, I think my son is on to us. I think he knows. I closed the diary, even more determined to find answers. One day after my mother had introduced a new cat from the shelter to our home, a very attractive white and black cat with a distinguished-looking white moustache that we chose to call Hercule Poirot, given the fact that he did look rather like a stylish gentleman. We hadn't gone into the decision to adopt lightly, as we had firmly decided a companion was definitely needed for our marmalade tabby called Herman. As his all-time companion was recently deceased, now buried under the old oak tree that graced our front yard, it seemed that Herman had slipped into a very deep depression after little Yeti had died. They had been as thick as thieves, the two of them together. The introduction between the two cats had gone completely haywire, as they spat at each other, hissing, spitting, growling, with hair standing on edge, while their tails tucked under their bodies. It wasn't pretty, while any attempts to redeem the situation meant that they were in the firing line of razor-sharp cat claws. I had hundreds of nasty scratches all over my hands and arms. My mother was seriously considering calling Jackson Galaxy, the cat behaviourist on television from the television programme My Cat from Hell that graced our television sets in 2011. It would seem that Herman had taken to spraying the whole house with a discharge of his urine, as if to affirm to the new cat that this was his territory. He sprayed his cat litter all over the house to display his rising level of angst, to such an extent that our floors had become an obstacle course for treading your bare feet over unexpected shards of cat litter that could cut into your skin like pieces of glass. Our house was beginning to reek of the heady aroma of cat pee, and it certainly wasn't pleasant. It was when I was bending down under my mother's bed to call out the cowering Hercule Poirot that was staring at me with wide green eyes filled with terror, as Herman was circulating the bed as if he was ambushing the poor thing. And that was when I discerned the tin box hiding in the corner of my mother's bed. It was a light bulb moment for me. Could my adoption papers be hidden in that tin, I wondered? One night when my parents had slipped out to a restaurant for a quick bite to eat, while I'd pretended to have a dodgy stomach, I quickly scurried into their bedroom, retrieving the tin box from under the bed. I opened it hastily with fingers shaking as I looked inside. Sure enough, I found my birth certificate, which did not give anything away, as it was pretty standard. But then I found the adoption papers listing my mother's name and her address, which I was surprised to learn was in fact a woman's prison. There was no mention of my father's name on these papers. Lovely. My true mother was actually incarcerated. It didn't get better than that, did it? I noticed there was a picture of a woman wearing a prison's pair of scrubs, holding a baby in her arms, which I imagine had to be my birth mother. She looked pretty, feminine, with long brown hair and brown eyes. Not what you would expect a prison inmate to look like. I knew at once that this was my mother. I could feel it in every fibre of my being. She looked exactly like me. And the baby in her arms, it was me without a doubt, as I had seen other baby pictures of myself. There was a letter addressed to Richard. Now that wasn't my name, but I sense it was for me. The name that my birth mother had chosen to call me, a name that my adopted parents had failed to honour, which in itself I found to be distasteful, as this poor woman had given up her own son for them to adopt. The least they could have done was given me the name that she had chosen for me. Richard, I thought. I quite liked it. I think I was more of a Richard than a Leith any day of the week. I quickly steamed open the letter, using a kettle to assist me in this very delicate process. The letter read, "Dearest Richard, I'm not giving you up for adoption easily. I want you to know this decision is the hardest decision I've ever had to make in my entire life. For in my short time on this earth, you are without doubt the most precious and blessed thing that could have ever happened to me. I consider it an extreme honour to have carried you in my womb for 9 months. But I know that given my current status as a prisoner in a women's correctional institute, that the wisest thing I can do is to give you up for adoption. You deserve a much better life than what I could offer you. I'm not in a position to financially or emotionally take care of you, but I want you to know, Richard, that you are the greatest, dearest, and most wonderful joy of my life. And wherever you may be, know this, that I love you with all my heart and much, much more. If one day you should desire to look me up, you are more than welcome. You must think me a very bad person to be locked away in a prison. I want to assure you that bad I am certainly not. Foolish, naive, and stupid are more the words you would lay at my door. In short, I saw my boyfriend kill a man in cold blood. He was your birth father, I'm afraid. The less you know about him, the better. Not a good man, I'm afraid. But his behaviour, I believe, is born about from the abusive childhood he endured, rather than whom he was meant to be. I said nothing about his atrocity to anyone, which made me guilty as charged. If the circumstances had been different, nothing in the world would separate me from you, as I would have unequivocally raised you as my very own. But in my current precarious predicament, what kind of life could I ever offer you? Your loving mother, Simone Corder." I began to tremble on the note that I was reading, the tears pouring down my face, as I realised that all my suspicions had been affirmed. I think I was also feeling a measure of relief that I wasn't going completely stark raving mad, and that my feelings were justified that I was adopted, and weren't wrong. Then after the initial shock, it was like all my emotions became expunged from me. I felt vacant and empty, blank like a white page on a computer screen. I went to bed, lying there in the late hours of the night, staring into space, with the kitten whom had previously been so traumatised now lying safely in my arms. Luckily it seemed that Herman had begun to accept Hercule Poirot's presence in our home. It had happened after Hercule Poirot had allowed Herman to eat his leftover mince, and Herman, who is a very overweight ginger cat, was beginning to see the incredible perks of having a cat around that didn't eat all its food, which invariably meant more food for Herman to enjoy, and that was a no-brainer for him. So within a day the two cats became firm friends. I looked at my new cat and whispered, "We're both adopted." But Hercule Poirot didn't seem to mind. He purred like a little engine. I had heard my parents return home, whispering in the passageway, so as not to wake me up. But I had heard everything. The clink of their mugs as they took their cups of piping hot cocoa to bed. The quiet giggles along the hallway. The gentle scuttle of feet trying to be very quiet, tiptoeing to bed. It was weird to think that those two people claiming to be my parents were nothing more than impostors in my life. I could feel the anger bubbling up in the back of my throat. I reached for my cell phone and sent a message to my friend. "It's me. Something's come up. Something important to tell you. Meet you in the woods. 10 minutes. I looked at my phone as a message appeared on the screen. "Can't it wait?" "No," I responded. "Sorry, but it can't." "Okay, see you there. 10 minutes, bro." "This better be good." My response, "You better believe it is." This was not the first time I'd sneaked out of the house to meet my friend in the woodgrove, but I really needed to talk to him about what I'd uncovered. It always helped to have a listening ear. It would seem Oscar was a brilliant listener. He wasn't adverse to giving sound, solid advice. For a 13-year-old boy, he was wise beyond his years. Even my mother had said as much. "I can't believe your son is only 13, she told his mother once. "He's an old head on young shoulders. He really is." Mrs. Ella Sarandon had nodded. "He's that all right. He was the one that helped me during the gruelling, bitter divorce I went through with his father. You know what he said to me? He said, 'Mum, your marriage was just like a chapter in a book. Turn over the page and it only gets better.' Of course, he was absolutely right." I tiptoed down the passageway of our ranch-style house towards the entrance hall, where the alarm unit with the red button lit up with the words armed. I tapped in the code. The green light came on, registering the unarmed sign. I tiptoed down the passageway again, unable to conceal the inevitable creaks and groans of the parquet floor that failed to accommodate my stealth-like footsteps. I could hear the soft snores of my father emanating from the main bedroom as I crept back into my room. My parents were both deep sleepers, but just in case they woke up, I puffed up my bed with pillows so it looked like my lumpy fawn was lying in bed under the duvet. I quickly threw on an anorak, a pair of jeans and some sensible brogues, along with my headlamp, and squeezed myself out of the window, where I scampered over to the bicycle shed to grab my bike. Before long I was riding my bicycle down the curved ribbon of asphalt, where the honey locust trees lined each side of the pavement. Luckily there were street lights on, and the occasional house was lit up with energy-saving outside light bulbs, but it was an inky, tenebrous, rather gloomy night, as even the moon seemed shrouded by a veil of foggy mist. The stars seemed obscure, as if they were blotted out from the sky, hiding their twinkling forms beneath the velvety dusk, so as to camouflage their opulence, rather like wearing a thick black heavy coat over a sparkling rhinestone dress. In truth, my whirling emotions were whizzing around my head like fast cars on a highway. I was momentarily distracted, which was hardly surprising, really, given the monumental revelations I'd uncovered this night. So I didn't pay heed to the menacing ambience. If I'd stopped to think about it, or given the matter more than a fleeting thought, I would have noticed that there were no noises you would expect to normally hear. No owl hoots, chirping crickets or croaking frogs. No distant calls of a wolf or coyote on the wind. It was incredibly still. Then I saw him coming out of the dark shadows, holding his bike. A familiar, reassuring figure. It was Oscar. I was so relieved to see him. We parked our bikes in the usual spot, walked through the flowery meadow towards the stream, where we sat next to the water in our usual spot, listening to it crashing over the rocks. "What's this all about, bro?" asked Oscar, furrowing his forehead curiously, looking at me through his steely eyes. "This had better be good," as we sat down on the smooth rocky platforms together, where light sprays of water caressed our shoulders. "It's true," I said. "I'm adopted. I found the papers hidden in a tin under my mother's bed this evening. They've kept the secret from me for over 13 years. Can you believe it?" "I'm sorry, bro. I had no idea. When you were going on and on the other day about believing you were adopted, well, I have to say I seriously thought you were barking up the wrong tree. I even asked my mother if she thought you looked like your parents. She believes you have a striking resemblance to your mother. But all this time you knew. What was it that you said?" "A wolf knows when it's being raised by bears." "Wow, that's right. Remind me if I ever adopt a child in the future to tell them on day one that they're adopted. I see you're not taking this well, bro." "I'm angry," I said. "I feel betrayed. I mean, why did they keep this from me for so long?" "Well, maybe they had their reasons. Did you find out anything about your real mum?" "Yeah, I found a letter she wrote me from prison. She's incarcerated because my father killed a man. She didn't say a word, so that makes her an accessory to the crime." "Whew, that's big, brother. I don't know what to say. But maybe her being in prison could be the reason your parents kept very quiet." "Maybe," I said, "but that's no excuse. What should I do?" "Be straight with them, bro. Tell them you know. Don't brush it under the carpet. It'll eat you alive." All of a sudden, as we were sitting on the rocks together, discussing the issues about my being adopted, we heard a rather strange sound. It sounded like strange squeaks, along with a movement that was remarkably like heavy feet thumping the ground. "What's that?" I whispered. "Shh," whispered Oscar. "Remain very still. Don't move." Then we saw her as she emerged from the shadows, at first a dense, heavy, dark silhouette, as she made her approach. My first impression was that a bear was moving towards us with such an elegant, graceful stride that made the creature look like it was actually floating. It was only as the creature got ever closer that I observed the overlong arms and hands. In that moment I knew this was not a bear. It was a Bigfoot female, as I could see this creature had firm, small breasts, was standing erect at about 7 foot tall, 3 feet wide across the shoulder area, covered in long, flowing dark hair. She looked like a gigantic human being, but muscular, powerful, built like a sturdy piece of farming machinery, or an animal of substantial size, more in line with a rhino, hippo, or elephant, but in a more of a vertical, towering shape like a tree. Her face was so human. I was gobsmacked, as I always assumed a Bigfoot's face would bear a striking resemblance to an ape. But this was not the case. I noticed her skin was a dark coal colour, a leathery texture. It gleamed in the moonlight. Her nostrils flared very flat against her face. Her eyes deep-set and dark, a treacle-looking colour, giving off a red eye shine in certain lights. Her cheekbones high, her chin pointed and pronounced. She was standing close to the light of our head torches, so it swathed her in a gentle luminescence. Only a foot away from us, on powerful, stocky legs. To our immense surprise, the squeaking sound we had heard emanated from our mountain bikes. She was carrying both of them in one hand, as if they were nothing more than tiny little paperweights. She put the mountain bikes next to us, where they collapsed at our feet in a messy, dishevelled heap. She pointed to them, then to the woods. She began speaking fast in a language that neither me or Oscar could understand. She looked at us directly in the eyes, earnestly, with a troubled look. She kept saying 3 words over and over again, with an urgency as if someone was saying something like, "Call the police, call the police, call the police." It had that kind of poignancy to it. She kept pointing to the woods, as if she was exceedingly bothered by something. And that was when we saw lumbering through the woods a very grumpy-looking Bigfoot, who looked as if he was exceedingly bad-tempered and crotchety. You could see he was old. He looked weathered, wilted, and although big, he looked shrunken, as if at one time he was enormous. To us he was still intimidating, but my guess in his prime, instead of being 7 foot, he was taller, wider, more burly. Although I can't be sure, of course, but this was the impression I got that enabled me to reach this conclusion. When he saw us from the distance, he let out a loud, objectionable roar, began to mock charge us as he gathered some heavy stones, throwing them in our direction, but never directly at us. It was as if to say, "Get out of here." The female Bigfoot was young, strong, lofty, majestic, powerful. She pushed our bicycles towards us, shouted a few warning words. We wasted no time in climbing on our bikes and getting the hell out of there. I glanced back briefly over my shoulders to see the female Bigfoot was trying to calm down the belligerent old man, who was oscillating his overlong arms wildly, stamping his feet, while she was almost holding him down with a powerful hand on his shoulders and talking to him intently. I don't think I've ever cycled so fast in my life. Everything that transpired was so surreal. It was as if we were floating on in a dream and would wake up to realise that that was all it was. But it was true. Me and Oscar knew what we had seen. Oscar returned with me to my house, squeezing through my bedroom window. We sat up all night drinking glasses of Mountain Dew, looking at each other with bemused, wide eyes. "Did we really see that?" I asked him. He nodded. "We did see that." "I just can't believe it," I said. "I thought we'd be really afraid if we saw a Bigfoot, but when I saw her, the female was so natural, so nice." "She was nice," Oscar agreed. "You're right about that. She was warning us about the cantankerous old man. Did you see how tiny our bicycles looked in her hand? It certainly gives you a perspective of how huge she actually was. She went to fetch our bicycles to hasten our escape. She must have seen us long before we even knew she was there. She helped us to get away from him." I nodded. She was incredible. "Do you think he would have hurt us?" asked Oscar. "No, I don't think so. He was all bark and no bite. But she clearly wanted us out of his way. She knew that he could have a tantrum, I imagine." I looked at my friend with sparkling eyes. "We saw a Bigfoot! I can't believe it! Now you can never complain that I got you up too late." The following evening, as my mother was placing the lasagna on our plates, along with some salad, we were all seated around the table. I piped, "Mum, I know I'm adopted. I know my real mother's incarcerated." My mother dropped her knife to the floor. Her mouth hung open like a Venus flytrap. She looked astonished. Her frightened eyes grew as wide as saucers. How can you know that?" "I've always known I was adopted, Mum. A wolf always knows when it's been raised by bears." What are you talking about?" "I found the evidence last night in the metal box underneath your bed. I read the letter my mother wrote me. My real name is Richard, but you called me Leith. I like Richard better." My mother mopped her brow. She was beginning to sweat profusely. She kept giving my father anxious glances. I could see tears building up on her lashes. Although I felt guilty about this confrontation, some things needed to be said, and there was no time like the present to get them off my chest.
"Son," he interceded, "we never told you that you were adopted for your own good. We deemed it was better if you didn't know, especially since your real mother is in prison."
"So were you ever going to tell me?" "I'm not sure," said my mother. "I really wanted to. It was very hard. I was afraid you would love us less if you knew the truth." "That's ridiculous. Of course I love you. You're still my parents, but I wish you'd told me the truth. It's not good to hide things." "You're probably right, son," said my mother, taking me into her arms, the tears now pouring down her face. "Will you forgive us?" "Of course I forgive you." To cut a long story short, I'm now in contact with my birth mother. I visited her a few times. She's a very good woman who made a very grave mistake and is paying a heavy price for it. It is sad how that happens, but there are lots of people incarcerated for the very same reason, as silly mistakes have destroyed many lives. It's piteous, really, if you think about it. I love my real parents enormously, but I think they are relieved that I found out the truth. We all feel as if a weight has been lifted off our shoulders, for now I have found out my true identity and am at peace with it. I often meditate on the fact that if it hadn't been for a random bicycle ride in the middle of the night, after discovering that I was adopted, I may have never met the elusive creature called Bigfoot. I'm so glad I did. Although that grumpy male, well, I wouldn't mind keeping my distance from him. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.